Greetings and welcome back to room 303, and we turn now to our Harvard Classics lecture number 53 out of the Harvard Classics volumes number 5. This is our discussion of Emerson's Beauty. Now, this is the last of the essays in volume number 5. We will have English traits to follow, but this is the last of the essays. By the way, for your notes, let's make sure that you understand that what we're talking about now is the essay that Emerson wrote entitled Beauty in 1860. There is a chapter 3 in the 1836 Nature book-length essay that Emerson wrote called Beauty. We don't want to confuse the two, and in fact, even though it's not in Harvard Classics, I'll go ahead and give a lecture on that really famous book-length essay called Nature later, okay? So you can look for that on LearnStrong. Speaking of LearnStrong, if you haven't been following my lectures on Emerson, you want to hit learnstrong.net, go down that left-hand side, find where the Harvard Classics lectures are, and go ahead and find the at least lecture 35, which is my introductory lecture on Emerson. There I introduce the concept that we are always looking at Emerson from three perspectives. We want to talk about Emerson as teacher or person or man. We want to talk about him as philosopher or idealist, sometimes referred to as transcendentalist, although we've said that he often didn't like that term applied to himself. And then finally, Emerson as artist or creator, what we call to be. And in this essay, for example, on beauty, this is a beautiful essay, if I can say that. And we will kind of maybe hear some of the amazing poetry. I mean, when you hear this essay read out loud, it reads like a prose poem. It's quite beautiful. Intentionally, I think so. Our learning theory, just to remind, challenges us to connect new information to old information in meaningful ways. We try to do that through our reading from three different perspectives by asking three different questions about the text, in this case, Emerson's Beauty. Level 1, what does the text say? Here we're just summarizing. Level 2, what does the text mean? Here we subdivide it to A, themes, messages, and 2B. That's that rhetoric stuff we were talking about a few seconds ago. Not what Emerson says, but how Emerson says it. And then finally, at level 3, we answer the question, how can I relate to a text like this? At 3A, relate to other texts and to the world. And at 3B, and most significantly, for our learning theory, relate to ourselves personally. I hope, as I hope all the other prior lectures have done, I hope that you're challenged in some way by the reading and study of this essay. Now, for some background information real quickly. Published in 1860, think about that date, 1 year prior to the American Civil War beginning. That is significant because one of the most horrific moments in American history, can we say one of the most ugly moments in American history, predated by 1 year the writing of an essay on beauty. Now, there's a couple of keys here to reading this, but I'm going to go back to one that I've said again and again in lectures, and that is Plato's Republic, especially Book 6, and what we call the theory of the forms. We won't do it because we've done it so many times on the whiteboard, but if you wanted to go back, you could. And you could say, okay, so we've got this two-box theory happening on the board. In the first box, we're going to put those things that are physical. In the second box, we're going to identify things that are metaphysical. Think about how we started that whole introductory series of comments by putting in the first box, in the physical box, related to the five senses, a beautiful person. We think of a beautiful swimsuit model, for example, or whatever. But about that beautiful swimsuit model, we point out that over time everything sags and bags, something that Emerson is going to talk about in his essay. And yet there will still remain this thing called beauty, this concept of beauty that will appear in the second box. Of course, again, we can talk about different ideas, a lot of money in the first box, the concept of value in the second box, the exchanging of fluids and hooking up, sex in the first box related to the physical, the second box, love, and on and on and on it goes, right? Of course, we can talk about Ruthie's tree out there in the first box because you can see it, taste it, touch it. We won't get into it. But then there will be that second box. What are we going to say? Well, here, of course, this is nature with a capital N. This is, of course, going to be energy. And then, of course, we play the game as well with human beings. We have our body, but then we have this thing called our mind or our consciousness. I mean, touch your mind. Where is it? Well, that means it doesn't exist. No, it exists, but not in the physical world, in the metaphysical world, right? If you go or transcend beyond the first box to the second box, we call that transcendentalism, and ergo the title of the philosophic movement that Emerson is supposed to have at least started. There's a lot of debate about that, obviously. We think about John Keats, and I've given a lecture on Ode to a Grecian Urn, and I think that, you know, you'll remember that final line, beauty is truth, truth, beauty. The only way to explain that is through that kind of philosophic system of Plato's form theory, and certainly we're going to be thinking about the notion of the true and the beautiful in an essay like this. The quest to define beauty is what we call, from the ancient Greeks, aesthetic theory. Of course, we immediately think of Aristotle's Poetics and some earlier lectures that we've given already on that. Really, the question of this essay is a two-part question. What is beauty, and what makes something or someone beautiful? Is beauty in the eye of the beholder? Is there some kind of standard? Is beauty real? Well, I don't know. Is your mind real? Is energy real? I mean, can you know, give me 3 ounces of truth or 15 pounds of peace? Well, no. So then joy doesn't actually exist. Well, no, it exists. It's just you can't. I mean, it's not physical. Emerson will say beauty is the same. Now, I should point out that this is an essay that I think really should be read more today than ever. Because of this tension, especially within our schools and within our academies, this tension between the humanities and the sciences. We were commenting in the prior lecture on that challenge that a student gave to me to explain why the humanities is of any value, because she was an engineer major, she loved her science and her math, she saw value in her science and her math, and I made the observation to her, with your science and math we can build buildings, we can build planes, we can explain why when planes fly into buildings, the buildings fall. Again, referencing the tragedy of 9/11. But what science can never give to us is the values to know whether killing lots and lots of people by flying an airplane into a building is the good thing or the bad thing, the right thing or the wrong thing. For that, you need the humanities. They are symbiotic, and this is going to be an important part of how we read this essay, that symbiosis between the practical science and the values that the humanities will provide for us. Well, let's get into this conversation. We have 28 paragraphs. As I said in other lectures, I recommend that you number these paragraphs, and we'll go to work. I wish that I could read this. I mean, I've said this about every one of these lectures. I mean, Emerson's prose is brilliant. Dude, if you want to be a good writer, you got to read good writing. And I can offer almost no one who excels Emerson in his prose. He is genius, but I can't read it all. So but we will start by getting kind of a sense of the prose and what I'm going to call prose poetry. It's fun to read. Paragraph 1. The spiral tendency of vegetation infects education also. Our books approach very slowly the things we most wish to know. I mean, I've had students that say, you can say that again. The stuff I really feel like I want to talk about, I want to learn, schools have a tendency to not talk so much about. What a parade we make of our science, and how far off and at arm's length it is from its objects. Our botany is all names, not powers. Poets and romancers talk of herbs of grace and healing, but what does the botanist know of the virtues of his weeds? The geologist lays bare the strata and can tell them all on his fingers, but does he know what effect passes into the man who builds his house in them? What effect on the race that inhabits a granite shelf? What on the inhabitants of marl and alluvial? Now, in other words, the point here that he wants to make is there's a problem with science of his day. We could argue still today. Of course, in earlier lectures we talked about that 1700 scientific enlightenment, the differentiation of the value spheres, art, morals, and science being separated, coming apart, because the church had total power before then. Galileo was only allowed to speak what the church would allow him to speak, etc., etc. But we will hear now in Emerson this idea that something happened as science was differentiating or moving away from the other value spheres into what by the postmodern epoch we call scientism, the idea that science is the answer to everything. It's almost as if science is the new religion, if you will, or the new dogma, if you will. By paragraph number 2, he says it. The problem with science is that it has a tendency to break things apart, and he doesn't necessarily like to see the whole picture. It lacks sympathy, that is to say values, and he says it lacks in some ways a human side, is the way he says it. This is how he says it. The human heart concerns us more than the pouring into microscopes and is larger than can be measured by the pompous figures of the astronomer. We immediately think of Whitman's When I Heard the Learned Astronomer, yes. The point here being that we have a tendency to bifurcate our education into either science or the humanities. Of course, an integralist approach, one that we always will recommend in 303, is to see these kinds of things together, right? I mean, remember that in our very early comments about Greek thought, we pointed out that Pythagoras begins, that great science, that great math mind, begins by looking at harmonics and the beauty of music. Right? It's all history and it's all science to that degree, right? In paragraph number 3, he continues by saying this: we are just so frivolous and skeptical. Men hold themselves cheap and vile, and yet a man is a faggot of thunderbolts, a collection of thunderbolts. This goes back to his views in self-reliance, right? All the elements pour through his system. He's the flood of the flood and fire of the fire. He feels the antipodes of the pole, each drops of his blood. They are the extension of his personality. His duties are measured by that instrument he is. And a right and perfect man would be felt to be the center of the Copernican system. 'Tis curious that we only believe as deep as we live. We do not think heroes can exert any more awful power than that surface play which amuses us. A deep man believes in miracles, waits for them, believes in magic, believes that the orator will decompose his adversary, believes that the evil eye can wither, that the heart's blessings can heal, that love can exalt, talent can overcome all odds. From a great heart, secret magnetisms flow incessantly to draw great events. But we prize very humble utilities, a prudent husband, good son, voter, a citizen, and deprecate any romance of character, and perhaps reckon only his money value, his intellect, his affection, as a sort of bill of exchange, easily convertible into fine chambers, pictures, music, and wine. And then he continues in paragraph 4, the motive of science was the extension of man on all sides into nature, till his hands could touch the stars, his eyes see through the earth, his ears understand the language of beast and bird and the sense of the wind, and through his sympathy heaven and earth should talk with him. But that is not our science. These geologies, chemistries, astronomies seem to make wise, but they leave us where they found us. He continues, science in England, in America, is jealous of theory, hates the name of love and moral purpose. There's a revenge for this inhumanity. What manner of man does science make? The boy is not attracted. He says, I do not wish to be such a kind of man as my professor is. The collector has dried all the plants in his herbal, but he's lost weight and humor. He's got all snakes and lizards in his vials, but science has done for him also and has put the man into a bottle. Our reliance on the physician is a kind of despair of ourselves. The clergy have bronchitis, which does not seem a certificate of spiritual health. Macready thought it came of the falsetto of their voicing. That is to say, in other words, we are lost, and science can't help us find our values. Again, we're back to that notion of, can you explain why flying an airplane into a building, lots of people dying, is wrong using physics? Well, no, physics will tell us everything about how it happens. It just won't tell us whether it was the right thing or the wrong thing. And to this degree, he argues, young students are not attracted to the sciences. Now, of course, we'll have to argue that maybe Emerson got this wrong, and that ultimately, because that's where all the money lies, students go on to major in engineering and the like. But the question is obviously, why can't a student love it to be an engineer and also love the poetry of Keats or an essay by Emerson? I'm certain that it can be done. He continues in paragraph number 4 by even giving a great word picture, a story about an Indian prince, he says, who he says was out walking and he saw some elk in the field and they were having fun, and so he comes back to the king and he says, hey, I want to live like those elk. And the king says, I'll leave you in charge for 7 days, and at the end of 7 days I'm going to put you to death. Go. And he leaves, and he comes back at the end of 7 days. How did you do? And the kid says, well, here's the problem. I was trying to have a good time, but all I could think about was the fact I was going to die at the end of 7 days. To which the king then says, hey, why don't you do this? Live, my child, and be wise. In other words, think about it. The looming of death took away the beauty of his life. And yet we all know that we had to leave the park when we were children. We couldn't stay there and swing forever. I don't want to leave the park. No. You got to leave the park and go to the van. You don't get to stay forever and swing at the park. You ain't met no 200-year-old people. The fact that you can only live here for a while should inform everything that you do with beauty, Emerson says. It shouldn't be a source of fear. It should be a source of beauty. And that is to say, the joy of our life is in the beauty of our life. By paragraph number 5, he says it this way: no object really interests us but man, and in man only his superiorities. And though we are aware of a perfect law in nature, it has fascination for us only through its relationship to him, or as it is rooted in the mind. In other words, our love of beauty is the start of science, and we should never forget that. And because of that, it never goes out of fashion. By paragraph 6, he says it this way: nature furnishes us with every sign of grace and goodness, the delicious faces of children, the beauty of schoolgirls, the sweet seriousness of 16, the lofty air of well-born, well-bred boys, the passionate histories and the looks and manners of youth and early manhood. This sounds like a Whitman poem, doesn't it, right? Whitman very influenced, obviously, by this essay. And the varied power and all that well-known company that escort us through life. We know how these forms thrill, paralyze, provoke, inspire, and enlarge us. Paragraph 7, he says it this way: beauty is the form under which the intellect prefers to study the world. All privilege is that of beauty, for there are many beauties, as of general nature, of the human face and form, of manners, of brain or method, moral beauty, or the beauty of the soul. By paragraph 8, he says, the ancients talked about a flame of fire that was inside of a person. That is to say, beauty is somehow within. He says, we say that every man is entitled to be valued by his best moment. He says, liberty and power await a person. By paragraph 9, he says it this way: the question of beauty takes us out of surfaces to thinking of the foundations of things. Goethe said, the beautiful is a manifestation of secret laws of nature, which but for this appearance had been forever concealed from us, end quote. And the working of this deep instinct makes all the excitement, much of it superficial and absurd enough, about works of art, which leads armies of vain travelers every year to Italy, Greece, and Egypt. We should point out these vain travelers. Emerson was one of them, and in fact we'll be doing English traits here in a while, his response after a journey. And he says it this way at the end of paragraph 9, but as fast as he sees beauty, life acquires a very high value. In other words, the source of our values comes from some appreciation of beauty and the aesthetics of beauty. As we've said before, this is Aristotle's answer from Poetics, right? About what's the difference between you and your dog. Both of you can look at the sunset. Only one of you will see it as beautiful. That is fundamental to what it means to be a human. And once we can no longer appreciate the beauty, for Aristotle, we no longer are human. We're just like another animal to that degree. It's a compelling argument. By paragraph 10, he says he's going to try to attempt to define beauty, although he's warned against it. He says, I am warned by the ill fate of many philosophers not to attempt a definition of beauty. I will rather enumerate a few of its qualities. We ascribe beauty to that which is simple, which has no superfluous parts, which exactly answers its end, which stands related to all things, which is the mean of many extremes. It's the most enduring quality and the most ascending quality. By the way, this use of the word quality makes us think, for those of us who love the book novels, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, right? And there he is in his university classroom in Bozeman challenging his students to define quality. Well, Emerson's playing the same game. Of course, if you play the game of Plato's book 6 and those two boxes, then we will put in those two boxes the second box, both the concept of beauty and, of course, quality itself, right? Paragraph number 10 will finish with love. In the true mythology, love is an immortal child, and beauty leads him as a guide. Nor can we express a deeper sense than when we say, beauty is the pilot of the young soul. What a great line. Beauty is the pilot of the young soul. By paragraph number 11, he's ready to say it this way: beauty is only an invitation from what belongs to us. 'Tis a law of botany that in plants the same virtues follow the same forms. It's a rule of largest application, true in a plant, true in a loaf of bread, that in the construction of any fabric or organism, any real increase of fitness to its end is an increase of beauty. That is to say, functionality. Now this is huge. Put it in your notes. Emerson, because of his love of nature, is going to say everything has its ultimate purpose. What is the ultimate purpose of the human? Beauty. more particularly the moral sentiment, as he'll talk about it here in a little bit. By paragraph number 12, he says it. Beauty is organic. The cat and the deer cannot move or sit inelegantly. And for those of us that love to watch those animals move, we know what we're talking about. That is to say, true beauty then is natural function. In the midst, he says, it's a great word picture, watch this. In the midst of a military show and a festival procession gay with banners, I saw a boy seize an old tin plate that lay rusting under a wall and poising it on the top of a stick. He set it turning and made it describe the most elegant imaginable curves and drew away attention from the decorated procession by this startling beauty. In other words, I love a word picture. Emerson is great at his word pictures. And in other words, he says, you can see beauty anywhere. And sometimes it's something as simple as a kid picks up a tin plate and starts spinning it. And it's more beautiful than all of that procession stuff, he says. It's quite a remarkable word picture. One more way. I mean, I think of at 3A observation. I think about that great scene in that Academy Award winning film American Beauty, when that young man is videotaping that plastic bag that's just being blown around by the wind. And there's something remarkably beautiful about that scene, isn't there? Paragraph 13, he says it this way. Beauty is the moment of transition, as if the form were just ready to flow into other forms. Any fixedness, heaping, or concentration on one feature, a long nose, a sharp chin, a humpback, is the reverse of the flowing and therefore deformed. Beautiful as is the symmetry of any form, if the form can move, we seek a more excellent symmetry. The interruption of equilibrium stimulates the eye to desire the restoration of symmetry and to watch the steps through which it is attained. This is the charm of running water, sea waves, the flight of birds, the locomotion of animals. This is the theory of dancing, to recover continually in changes the lost equilibrium, not by abrupt and angular, but by gradual and curving